Joining us now, former Congressman, Newt Gingrich's favorite congressman of all time. He told me that himself on multiple occasions, the Honorable Tom Davis. Tom, great to have you.
John, good to be back.
Now, Tom, as my listeners know, we're broadcasting today from the Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association's annual meeting, where you've got a big presentation today at noon. I'm not going to miss that. We're in Hot Springs. Hospital leaders, healthcare professionals, and experts from across Virginia are with us today, and they're focusing on what we're calling financing the future of healthcare amid a challenging and changing environment. Now, Tom, you're going to be addressing these healthcare leaders today at noon. In what ways will your message focus on challenges of the healthcare delivery system in the current climate we're in?
Well, John, I think we're going to talk about the polarized political climate and the fact that it's hard to have a conversation that we talk across each other, we talk at each other, but nobody sits down to say, how do we get solutions? You have, in Lee County, we just closed the hospital. A majority of our rural hospitals are running in the red at this point, are in jeopardy. You know, Medicaid is not profitable for hospitals or Medicare. They take lower reimbursements, and they have to do indigent care. It's very, very complex. In an urban area like mine, we find ways to do this in Fairfax, at Inova. We've done it through mergers, acquisitions, and building a gigantic system. But in these rural areas, it's really hurting. And money is out there that the state could tap into, but because it is labeled Obamacare, nobody wants to touch it. And I think Obamacare was terrible. In fact, frankly, if it were up to me, government never would have gotten into the healthcare business.
Right.
It's killed higher education and a lot of other things. But at this point, it's there. We have a huge rural hospital problem. And given the complexity of the healthcare system, we've got to find a way, if we can, to access it. We don't have to do it on President Obama's terms. That's the last thing I would want to do. But other states, Indiana, Governor Pence there has found a way to do it. Kasich in Ohio, Snyder in Michigan, Republican, have found a way to tool it to their particular needs in their state and bring that money for economic development and healthcare into their states.
Now, Congressman Davis, you're the Virginia chairman of Ohio Governor John Kasich's presidential campaign. Governor Kasich in Ohio, he expanded Medicaid, and at the same time he says he took an $8 billion budget deficit and turned it into a $2 billion budget surplus. Now, that's pretty good fiscal management. That's problem solving. But you know that I'm not a fan of expanding Medicaid under Obamacare. I think it's a broken system. Also, the fact of it is, once you expand an entitlement like this, even if it doesn't work, I mean, there's no going back. You can't then take 500,000 people and say, sorry, we were just kidding. But
John, the state is taking that money today. They're taking far greater pieces of Medicaid today at a 50% reimbursement rate. But they won't take a 90% reimbursement rate. Explain why you'll take it 50%, but you won't take it when 90% is reimbursed. Give me the logic in that.
Well, I think the issue is they're looking at the 3 or 4 or 500,000 people that would be covered if Medicaid expanded, but then you're stuck paying 10% of that, and then the other problem is,
but we're stuck with 50% of the rest of it. We're taking money already where we have to pay 50%. Why would you take it where you only pay 10%?
Because you're not because you don't have to expand it. The 50% is for the people that actually qualify under
our rules. They're under our rules because each state sets its own rules.
Right, under Virginia's rules.
Yeah, but if you can add more at a 90% reimbursement, why wouldn't you find a way to do that? Now, look, the way the federal government does this is idiotic. They have a one-size-fits-all standard. They're not very flexible. But the bottom line is we're having budget issues throughout the state. Nobody wants to raise taxes. I pay a ton of taxes at this point. Hospitals are hurting. Rural America right now is really hurt education-wise. It's hurt with in their hospitalization and what they can provide. Why in the world wouldn't you want to help these people if it only costs you 10 cents on the dollar?
Because the fear is that long term you're not going to be able to fund this, and Even
But
when
you're funding it at 50%. Why wouldn't you fund it if you only pay 10%? What's the difference? What's the demarcation line between the two?
Well, the difference is you've got another 500,000 people that you're not funding now at any percent that you're going to start funding at.
Well, we do fund
10%.
them. That's the problem. We fund them at the emergency room level.
Right.
We fund them in a very, very expensive way. We're not giving them preventable health care. So there is a law passed in 1986 before I was there. Indigent care hospitals have to provide under the law. And in some of these places, that's all they're getting. They're not getting any reimbursements at all for people presenting themselves. Look, healthcare is so complex. I wish that Obama and company had never tried to mess with this thing. Or if they tried to do something, do it incrementally. Because the healthcare economy is so complex. You do one thing, you do 30 things at one time. And so this bill is nothing like the Obama administration presented. It was written in a bad way. They're having some very innovative interpretations of it. But for a state, it becomes a little bit easier. You have money out there that you can access. You only pay 10%, and the other 90% comes from the government. And if they give you the states the ability to take that money and flexibly utilize this for health care, I think we can do a good job with it. Now, how you do that, I think, is the key. I'm not advocating one way or another, the Ohio plan or the Indiana plan or Kentucky plan. But I do think, given our rural hospitals are today, there's only one other solution, or two solutions. One is you close them, or B, we raise higher taxes here.
Well, but we're falling into again the argument of Medicaid expansion or everything, or hospitals shut down. We're not going to get Medicaid expansion in Virginia, not in the climate that we have now. It isn't going to happen. So my question to everybody who comes on my show, both sides of the aisle, is you're not going to get Medicaid expansion. The conservatives have a supermajority in the House. They just held on to the Senate, so it isn't going to happen. So what is the alternative? Because indigent care is real, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's overly costly. That's number one. The other issue is rural hospitals are underfunded. They're losing money. They're shutting down. We already had one shutdown in Southwest Virginia. So my question is, we're not going to get Medicaid expansion as it's been presented in Virginia. So what's the alternative? What else can we do?
Well, we're not going to get it the way it's been presented, and I'm not sure we should. But I think what we have to find a way with this money hanging out there, before we go to our taxpayers and ask them to pony up, or before we go to more hospitals and say, you have to shut down, let's find a way to access this. Let's work together and find a way to do it on Virginia's terms, not on the federal government's terms. And if we would put our access in it, it makes it a lot easier to do it in that way than to try to come up the money here in Virginia by picking everybody else's pockets. Let me tell you something else. I'm the chairman of the board, the rector at George Mason University. We're the largest university in the state. Our funding levels have dropped. We're getting a third from the state in terms of the percentage of what we spend from what we did 25 years ago, because Medicaid spending has gone from 2% to 23% of the state budget. You know, getting into the healthcare business is something that I thought was a mistake when we went into it. But in for a penny, in for a pound. We're not going to turn that clock back at this point. We're going to have to look at every alternative we can, though, to try to manage this in an appropriate way. Give people health care they need, I guess. Don't give them what they don't need.
Right.
But when we rely on these rural hospitals with no tax base, where they're forced to take indigent care, it's a death sentence.
Well, it is, and because what happens is the people without the 3 or 4 or 500,000, whatever the number is, of people that are in the coverage gap, they don't have coverage, but when they're sick, they just go to the emergency room. And the reality of what you're saying is that is 2 or 3 times the cost of what it would be if they just went to their regular doctor. So that's real. So let's just say, for argument's sake, we have a Republican president. It's still there. Ed Gillespie becomes the next governor of Virginia. If Obamacare is still in place, the funding cuts will have grown significantly as we enter 2018. By 2022, annual cuts to Virginia hospitals are projected to be $1 billion. This problem is only going to get worse. Will, in your opinion, the General Assembly do anything differently to figure this out?
Well, I think it all starts with leadership. As you know, in Michigan, Ohio, several states with Republican governors, they've had to fight it because, you got the mantra of Obamacare, which is very unpopular with the Republican base, and in the macro doesn't work very well. And let me just say something people don't understand about Obamacare. This was never intended to be a law. This was a bill to get off the Senate floor, and it had a lot of problems with it. Usually you fix this stuff in a conference, but because the Democrats lost their 60th vote when they lost the Massachusetts Senate seat, they could never get it to conference. They've never had a technical corrections bill, which on a bill this complex you have to do. There are a lot of fixes to this thing, even if you like it. This bill doesn't work very well. Repealing it, there are huge parts of it have already been repealed, the 1099 piece and several others. But yeah, this needs a complete revamp. And I hope the Republicans would step up to that should they win Congress. In the meantime, at the state level, things aren't getting any better. And the more you put into health care and these other areas, the less you're taking from higher education. And right now, it's hurting. I mean, UVA is getting like 6 or 7% of its budget from Virginia. What it does is it forces us to take more out-of-state students, and it punishes our Virginia students. So there's no easy answers here that politicians like to come up with. This is complex. We need adult conversations. There are tough policy trade-offs. But when you have hundreds of millions, literally over a 4-year term, billions of dollars sitting out there that we could access and only pay 10% of it, and helping people that otherwise are getting indigent care, it makes sense to try to find a way to get it. I'm not advocating a specific way.
Right.
I don't think it should be the Washington way, but there's got to be a Virginia way that we can huddle and try to access this money, because without it, we're going to close more hospitals.
Oh, I want to get back, Tom, to what you said just a few seconds ago, that the ACA bill as it stands was really never intended to become law as it stands.
Correct.
Because it was expected to go back to conference and the bugs get worked out and it be negotiated over. The Democrats lost that number 60, but why weren't there enough statesmen in the Democratic Party in the Senate at the time to say, well, wait a minute, we're not really going to send this through because it was never intended. We're going to have to find a way to get this right.
It's a good
Where
question.
were the statesmen, Tom?
Well, I'll tell you, within the White House, Rahm Emanuel was saying, Mr. President, don't do this. Let's do this thing incrementally. There were a lot of members who said, let's not do this. And Obama and, the folks said, look, we'll pass a flawed bill and fix it later versus starting all over again. That was the argument they had. And I talked to a couple of Democratic congressmen that went out talking about a great bill. I said, guys, it's not a great bill. They said, well, yeah, you're right. You just tell them the truth, that you went with a flawed bill, we'll try to fix it later versus starting all over again. But it is a terrible bill. But look, if you're sitting as a governor of a state and you can access money and get a 90% reimbursement and help hundreds of thousands of your citizens, just because you don't like the bill isn't the way to take. There are a lot of bills in Congress that I didn't like as a head of a county government in Fairfax. But if we could access some money and help our citizens, we did it. Whether it was building roads, or whether it was helping our health care, whether it was helping storm drainage or whatever, sewage treatment. There's a lot of federal programs we didn't like. I took over a county that was hugely in debt, and 2 years later, we were selected best financially managed county in the country. That's why I like John Kasich. We're numbers guys. We make tough decisions. You can't give everything to everybody, and if you listen to these debates, they want to spend this, they want to spend that, and they got to cut taxes. The numbers don't add up, and it's the crazy season.
How do you think your candidate for president, Governor Kasich, did Tuesday night?
Well, he had a tough night. I mean, look, it's 8 people. It's not his format. This is a solutions guy. He's turned around Ohio. He negotiated the only balanced budgets we've had in the last 50 years when he was in the House with Bill Clinton as chairman of the Budget Committee. It's a format that favors the quick phrase and those kind of things. But, that's only a piece of the final outcome. You take a look at the debates, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, and who is leading now. There's still a long, long way to go.
It's still fluid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, until we get to Iowa and then New Hampshire.
Well, for us, it's New Hampshire. I was probably going to be tough, but given the limited electorate there. But New Hampshire, it's independent, same-day registration. So it's more often, and that's going to be a very important state for Kasich and Christie and Bush.
Well, a lot of them. And you would say that Kasich has to finish, 1, 2, 3 in New Hampshire to survive?
Clearly, yes.
Yes. And just want to mention that Utah Governor John Hutzman said the same thing. He finished third in New Hampshire and ended his campaign the next day. So it doesn't always work out.
Right.
I want to thank Tom Davis for being with us, former Congressman, Northern Virginia. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're live at the Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association's 89th annual meeting in Hot Springs. I'll be right back.